Falegname, carpentiere, contadin, cuoco, dottore, musicista e poi barbiere, ingegnere, minatore, astronauta e cavaliere, ciabattino, muratore, ortolano e cameriere, tagliaboschi e poi pittore.
Osvaldo!
Look this way, children. We're about to watch an exceptional event, the Olympic Games. Hey, look who's here. Oswald. Hello, Oswald. I see you're our national team's flag bearer. But tell me, Oswald, do you know how the Olympics started? It's a very long story which begins in ancient Greece. Sport, however, is even more ancient. During prehistoric times, primitive man ran and used a bow when hunting for food. It was hard daily exercise, but kept him in good shape. He wasn't fat like you, Oswald. So, running as swiftly as the animals and aiming a bow were the first sports practiced by man. The first historical information on sporting activity comes from the Sumerians, who already practiced wrestling and boxing 4,000 years ago. Even the Egyptians practiced boxing, and as they lived on the banks of the Nile, they also invented a whole series of aquatic sports. But there's no denying it, Oswald. When you talk about sport in ancient times, you talk above all about the Greeks. Every Greek citizen was also a soldier and had to be ready to defend his country at any time. Therefore, he had to keep fit. So, from an early age, the Greek Oswald frequented places for physical exercise, called gymnasiums. Around the gymnasiums, there were schools. Don't they remind you of modern American campuses, Oswald? Of course, just as rivalry exists between today's universities, it existed between Greece's two major cities, Athens and Sparta. The Greeks, who knew nothing of records, competed with great style and elegance, very often to the accompaniment of music. But let's return to our friend Oswald at the Olympic Village for a moment. Who knows what he's up to now? Hello, Oswald. I see you're getting a bit of exercise. Well done. So, Oswald, how are the Olympics going? Well, did you know that the modern Olympics are only 100 years old? But just imagine, the ancient games went on for 12 centuries and were held 293 times in all. Every 4 years, the athletes of ancient Greece went to Olympia, where the races took place. According to Greek mythology, it was Hercules who founded the Olympics, games dedicated to Zeus, the father of the gods. Olympia was a beautiful place. At the center stood the Temple of Zeus, and around this sacred enclosure were magnificent buildings for races and competitions. The Hippodrome, wrestling school, a theatre and others. The games lasted 7 days and took place in summer. The first and last days were dedicated to parades and festivities. Completely naked and covered in oil, our Greek Oswald took part in athletic activities very similar to those we see today. Racing, jumping, the discus, the javelin, wrestling and boxing. The games were highly organised. There were selection heats and race officials, and it's upon this model that the modern Olympics were designed. The Chariot Races, the most spectacular races, came on the last day of the Games. In the hippodrome, a large crowd of people shouted encouragement to the competitors, just like they do today, Oswald dear. In the Greek Olympics, the prizes weren't medals, but sacred olive garlands and palm branches. But occasionally, statues of the winners were put up near the temples of the gods. On the last evening, when the games were over, the Olympian race officials, the winners and the priests celebrated together at an all-night banquet. What are you doing, Oswald? Oh, of course. A good shower cools you down after a race. Right. Let's continue our story of sport by talking about the Romans. A citizen of ancient Rome was a soldier between the ages of 18 and 45, and as a soldier, he took care of his physique with appropriate training. As well as the exercises which the Greeks did, the Romans were very fond of ball games and played with all types of balls, large, small, and even triangular ones. Of all the ball games, the Romans were crazy about harpastum, very similar to modern American football. But it was much more violent and was preferred by tough Roman soldiers. Harpastum, played by the Roman legionaries, soon spread through all the empire's territories. Are you listening, Oswald? What's that you're looking at? Yes, you're right. Modern stadiums really are enormous. But even ancient stadiums were impressive. The Colosseum could hold 100,000 spectators. It was here that the gladiator games took place. Cruel shows, but very popular. The gladiators were slaves trained specifically to fight each other to death. The circus games, in which the gladiators fought tigers, lions, bears, and other wild animals, were also very cruel. The most exciting spectacle was the chariot racing. But what a lot of violence, Oswald. The new Christian religion, which affirmed the importance of the spirit over the body, opposed those cruel shows with all its might. What are you looking at, Oswald? Oh, the horses. Elegant, aren't they? In the Middle Ages, sporting events were mostly those which involved horses and horsemen. The most colourful of tournaments and jousts attracted spectators from far and wide. Even these tournaments were rather violent, but the horsemen were looked upon kindly by the Christian Church, since their main duty was to defend God, their lords and their ladies. Oswald? Psst! Oswald! Oswald! Were you asleep? Just think what a long sleep the medieval horsemen had at the end of a tournament. Competing in jousts armed with heavy lances and swords was really rather tiring. The medieval horsemen received an education which included riding, fencing, wrestling, and archery with the bow and crossbow. But his favourite pastime was falconry. Tournaments included competitions such as the quintain, in which horsemen fought a dummy, and the foray, which was really a display, a chase in a simulated battle. However, in the main tournament, horsemen still fought to the last blood. But with the passage of time and the arrival of firearms, horsemanship became a thing of the past. Finally, sport began to break away from the need to prepare for battle. The Renaissance brought new ideals of beauty, and physical activity began to be viewed in a different light. During this period, physical education was taught in schools again. At the most famous courts, tutors taught that a healthy body meant a healthy mind. Such schools were still only attended by the nobility, but all the same, it was a sign that things were changing. In the meantime, the population took pleasure in the most lively competitions, such as Florentine Football, in which two teams of 28 players faced each other. The credit for the spread of ball games goes to France, where in the 17th century, tennis and pall-mall were very popular. But it's 18th century England that invents and gives a name to modern sport. The word sport, which remains the same in all languages, is English. During the 19th century, sporting enthusiasm spread all over the world, and towards the end of the century, a Greek trader had the idea of reviving the Olympics. They weren't a great success. The games were held just 3 times in more than 20 years. But to use a sporting term, the ball was in play and was picked up by Baron de Coubertin. Thus, on April the 6th, 1896, at Olympia in Greece, 285 athletes began the races of the first modern Olympics. Tell me, Oswald, do you know what the 5 rings on the Olympic flag represent? That's right. Each ring represents a continent. And do you know who invented it? Baron de Coubertin, of course. The Olympic Games are held every 4 years, and the honour of hosting them is assigned not to a nation, but to a city. Thus we have the Athens, Rome, Los Angeles Olympics, etc. Although we now tend to pay more attention to a nation's collection of medals, let's not forget that the Olympic Games were first organised as a competition between individuals, and the athletes who take part are not allowed to earn any money from sport. They must be amateurs. But let's go back to our Baron de Coubertin. You know, Oswald, it wasn't easy to convince the various governments to take part in the Olympics, and then the organisation of the Games was very costly. To cover the expenses, de Coubertin even had commemorative stamps printed. What a feeling, though, Oswald, to take part in that first opening ceremony. When King George of Greece pronounced the inaugural speech for the first time, the 80,000 people present were perhaps able to feel that it marked the start of a new era in the history of sport. What's that you're eating, Oswald? Oh, so you know that athletes have to be careful what they eat. But I really don't think that crisps are ideal for an athlete. Today's champions follow very carefully controlled diets, which are the result of scientific studies. Unfortunately, some athletes occasionally use dangerous medicines to increase the strength of their muscles. Moreover, with the advent of mass media, such as newspapers, radio and television, athletes are always at the centre of attention. It all started at the 1932 Los Angeles Olympics. Technology began to be applied to sporting facilities and organisation. The press and radio dedicated a lot of attention to the event, and large crowds of fans rushed to applaud their new heroes, the sports champions. Jesse Owens was a real hero. At the 1936 Berlin Olympics, he won 4 gold medals. The Nazist public was perturbed, and the Führer, Adolf Hitler, refused to shake the champion's hand just because he was black. What are you doing now, Oswald? Oh, taking a photo of the girls in the volleyball team. They're nice looking, aren't they? That reminds me, women first took part in the Olympics in 1908 in London. These days, thanks to television, Millions of people can follow this major sporting event. At times, though, because of its great popularity, the Olympics becomes the scenes of arguments which really have nothing to do with sport. New words, such as boycott, have become part of the Olympic vocabulary. A boycott occurs when a nation doesn't take part in the Games for reasons of political opposition, as was the case in Montreal in 1976, Moscow in 1980, and Los Angeles in 1984. Poor de Coubertin. Whatever happened to his Olympic ideals? Let's concentrate on the Olympic sports now, starting with athletics. This is the famous statue of a discus thrower. Oh, it's you, Oswald. That's right. We have to talk about athletics. Where shall we start? Yes, perhaps it will be better if we start with track and field events, which include 4 groups of sports: running, jumping, throwing, and the decathlon. Running is subdivided by the International Federation into 8 flat races and 3 hurdle races. The speed races require a physique with excellent reflexes and elasticity in the legs. No, Oswald, you aren't really the right man for it. The 800, 1,500, 3,000 and 5,000 metre races are called middle distance races. The inventors of the 3,000 metre steeplechase added 28 obstacles, including 7 ditches. Look out, Oswald! They're full of water! Hey, who's that arriving now? It's a long-distance runner, Oswald. Yes, the marathon is perhaps the most fascinating race in the Olympics. It was included at Baron de Coubertin's request to commemorate the classical marathon run by the Greek athletes in honour of Philippides. He was the soldier who ran more than 40 kilometres carrying the news of victory and died of exhaustion upon his arrival. Let's move on to the jumping events. This group includes the high jump, the pole vault, and the long jump. The high jump style, most widely used these days, was invented by Dick Fosbury, winner at the 1968 Olympics. Strange, isn't it, Oswald? You jump backwards. For the pole vault, the athlete uses a 5-metre-long pole made of fiberglass and thus manages to jump heights of more than 6 metres. Hey, Oswald, you look like a bullet. Last but not least, the long jump, which can be divided into a simple jump and a triple jump, 2 bounds with a step in between during the run-up. You seem tired, Oswald. What do you say? Shall we carry on tomorrow? All right. Oswald? Oh, here you are. I see you've got a shot in your hands. And in fact, today we're going to talk about throwing. Careful! It weighs over 7 kilos. Just think, in the early shot-putting contests, English athletes used cannonballs. Some other throwing apparatus is the javelin, a balanced pointed spear, and the hammer, which consists of a spherical iron head attached to a handle by a steel cable. Then there's the discus. Remember the statue of the discus thrower, Oswald? The athlete's pose has been the same for 3,000 years. The most tiring test in athletics is without doubt the decathlon. Think of it, Oswald. 10 competitions in 2 days. Running, jumping, throwing. You really have to have an exceptional physique. Let's move on to heavier athletics, which include weightlifting, judo and wrestling. Wrestling is a very ancient sport. Today it's subdivided into 2 main styles: Greco-Roman, in which the use of the legs is forbidden, and all-in wrestling, in which use of the legs is allowed, No, Oswald, no biting. It's against the rules. And so are kicking and scratching. There's also an oriental type of wrestling called judo. According to the Japanese legend, a doctor, observing how the branches of a willow tree bent under the weight of snow and then sprang up again, was struck by their elasticity and invented jiu-jitsu, from which judo derives. In fact, in judo, force isn't used to oppose force, and the body's natural equilibrium is exploited. Look how attractive the gymnasts are, Oswald. Modern gymnastics combines the methods and the exercises of the German Jan and the Swede Ling. The former invented equipment such as the bars, the vaulting horse and the parallel bars, while the latter created free exercises using small items of apparatus. The grace and lightness of the gymnast's movements correspond to great muscular strength and hours of training. Let's talk about boxing now, Oswald. No, Oswald, you're mistaken. Boxing is a sport, not a street fight. And it has ancient origins. In 688 BC, boxing was included in the ancient Olympics. The Greek boxers fought either bare-fisted or with their hands protected by a kind of leather glove called chesto. But the boxers became terribly disfigured after a couple of rounds. So ugly, in fact, that the Greeks, being great admirers of beauty, abolished boxing at the 385 BC Olympics. The Romans, too, practiced a kind of boxing similar to the Greek one. Roman doctors even went as far as saying that it cured headaches. What a strange theory, isn't it, Oswald? All the more so because the rounds had no time limit and finished when one of the two adversaries couldn't fight anymore. And this rule survived almost up till today. In 1892, the first modern boxing champion, John Sullivan, lost against the great Jim Corbett in the 21st round. At that time, a set of rules already existed. It was drawn up by the Marquis of Queensberry, an English gentleman who was very keen on boxing. Fights were subdivided into rounds, each one 3 minutes long, and the boxers had to wear big gloves. A floored boxer had to get up again before the referee counted to 10, otherwise he was declared a loser. And so modern boxing came into being in England. However, it was another nation, the United States, which launched the boxing craze. At the start of this century, professional boxers in America were already earning millions of dollars. Although dishonest individuals tried to buy the boxers in order to influence fights, boxing still became a popular sport in America. Boxers came to the United States from all over the world, like Primo Carnera, an Italian fighter who won many world titles in America. Yes, Oswald, I understand. You're a fan of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay, and you're quite right. Of the 59 fights in his career, he lost only 3. Yes, Oswald, we agree. He was truly the greatest boxer of all time. Now let's look at a sport that's not so violent. Cycling. Fun, isn't it, Oswald? The bicycle is a handy means of transport for covering short distances, and cycling is also a pleasant pastime. Our grandparents used to go on long rides in the country with the whole family. And from this healthy, fun activity, a sporting competition developed straight away. Speed and cross-country races were already run with the first strange bicycles in the 19th century. In fact, the first cycling competition dates back to 1865 and took place at Amiens in France. What hard work, Oswald! The streets weren't tarmacked, and just imagine, the wheels didn't even have tyres on them. Fortunately, towards the end of the last century, tyres were invented, and bicycles became more or less like those we see today. The number of people interested in cycling increased all the time, and the newspapers often talked about great cycling ventures. Soon cycling was subdivided into road and track events. The track events were held in sports facilities called cycle tracks. Road cycling is the most popular and consists of races divided into stages. The Giro d'Italia and Tour de France are the most important. The era of the first legendary cycling champions began. Girardengo, the champion of champions, Binder, the winged climber, and Guerra, the human locomotive. Our grandparents, Oswald, ran along the country roads, encouraging and occasionally helping the cyclists. 1933 was the year of the Gino Bartali phenomenon. In the years leading up to the Second World War, Bartali won everything. But a few years later, it was the turn of Fausto Coppi, who won the Giro d'Italia. At this point, Coppi and Bartali began a fierce duel which went on for 15 years. Tell me, Oswald, who did your dad support? Coppi? Yes, he soon turned out to be the best and perhaps the greatest champion of all time. Now we're at the Olympic Lake to talk about water sports. Hello, Oswald. What nice swimming trunks you've got on. You don't need them, though, because we want to talk about sports that are practiced on the water, not in it. Well, to travel over water, some kind of craft is necessary, and in prehistoric times, Oswald the cave dweller built all sorts of rowing boats. Rowing competitions and races were held on the Nile by the Egyptians and on the Tiber by the Romans. But it's in Venice, towards the end of the Middle Ages, that rowing originated. However, modern rowing derives from that which was practiced at the English universities of Oxford and Cambridge, which, since 1829, have met every year for their traditional race. Oh yes, Oswald dear, rowing is one of the most compelling sports of modern Olympics. Now tell me, Oswald, can you swim? Oh yes, you're very good. Even swimming is an ancient sport. As we've seen, the Egyptians already practiced it. The Assyrians, on the other hand, were cleverer and invented a kind of life belt. There are 4 modern swimming styles: the backstroke, which Oswald has demonstrated for us, the crawl or freestyle, the fastest and least tiring style, invented by an Australian. The crawl became famous thanks to Johnny Weissmuller, a great swimmer who turned actor to play Tarzan in dozens of films. The third style is the breaststroke, with its movements similar to those of a frog. It's the most natural and ancient style, but it's also the slowest. The dolphin, or butterfly, is the most modern style. Invented in the 1930s, it was introduced in competitions during the 50s. What are you doing up there, Oswald? Come down from that diving board right away. Diving is a dangerous sport which requires a lot of training and special deep pools. Well, it's time to head for the mountains. Wrap up warm, Oswald, because we're going to talk about snow sports now. Brrr, it's so cold, Oswald. But in order to talk about skiing, we had to come up here. Well, skiing originated in Sweden, a country where there's a lot of snow. The Swedes solved the problem of moving over the snow in ancient times. No, you'll sink that way, Oswald. All you have to do is widen and lengthen the sole, and you'll glide across the snow. In all northern countries, skis were essential for getting around, but up to the 16th century, they were simply sections of tree trunks attached to the feet. The first real ski competition took place at Tromsø in Scandinavia in 1843, and the credit for spreading this sport goes to Norway, until in 1924 the first Winter Olympics were held at Chamonix. But now, Oswald, show me what you can do with those skis. Do you think you can manage a free descent? You know it's dangerous, don't you? In fact, athletes reach speeds of up to 130 kilometers per hour. The free descent and the slalom events are kinds of alpine skiing. The free descent takes place on very long, very steep slopes. For the special slalom, on the other hand, the slopes are very short and are full of gates. The skiers have to move in a continual zigzag. The giant slalom is a mixture of free descent and special slalom. It combines high speed and acrobatics. Apart from alpine skiing, there is Nordic skiing, which includes cross-country skiing and ski jumping. Do you like cross-country skiing, Oswald? It doesn't require a slope, and it allows you to go on long journeys through the countryside. Yes, Oswald, this is a sport that can be practiced even by those of us who aren't so young anymore. Finally, we see the most impressive speciality, ski jumping. The jumper must be a very fit and very brave athlete. But what a sensation, to jump into the void for more than 150 meters. Who's this rider? Oh, it's you, Oswald. We didn't know that you had a passion for motorbikes. Even during the last century, there were many fans of the races held between bicycles fitted with engines, and the first real motorbike hadn't been created yet. With the advent of the motorbike, a new kind of champion was born. A champion who, apart from keeping in good physical shape, also had to know how to improve his vehicle. In fact, the great riders had to be good test drivers, even if these days they are helped by teams of skilled mechanics. The first motorbike race took place in France in 1895 and went from Paris to Bordeaux. It was very different from modern races, wasn't it, Oswald? Today's competitions are subdivided into classes, and each class is reserved for engines which are of equal power. Then there are motocross races, using very special bikes, with which you are almost able to jump walls. Let's talk about four-wheeled vehicles now, Oswald. The first car race was held in France, between Paris and Rouen, in 1894. The joint winners were a Peugeot and a Panhard, travelling at the reckless speed of 20 kilometers per hour. Motor racing fever soon spread all over the world, and the first great international races began. They were the romantic years of motor racing, of great champions such as Tazio Nuvolari, and mythical car builders such as Enzo Ferrari, a former racing driver who created the world's most legendary racing car. In 1950, Formula One racing first appeared, and since then enormous crowds of fans have followed the World Championships, which are held in the official circuits of 15 different nations. Every year, the rival teams tune up the engines of increasingly perfected racing cars, which are now capable of speeds exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. What are you reading, Oswald? Ah, so you like swashbuckling adventures. You know, for a long time, a knowledge of sword fighting was essential. You could be challenged to a duel from one moment to the next. Therefore, gentlemen indulged in extensive training programs with expert instructors in the halls of their castles. In those days, the end of the weapon wasn't protected by a metal disc as it is today, and duels were often fatal. Fencing is a sport with great traditions and was already officially included in the first modern Olympics in Athens. That's a foil, Oswald. It's the only weapon used by both men and women. It's very light and flexible. You can only strike with the point, and you may only aim at your opponent's torso. This, on the other hand, is a sword, and with it you may strike any part of the body. Finally, we have the sabre, with its slightly curved blade, used to strike obliquely, but only above the belt. Oh yes, Oswald. Fencing brings back memories of glorious times, duelling for a beautiful lady, but often a cavalier's life also depended on the speed of his horse. Before the machine era, horses were in fact an indispensable means of transport. Horse races are part of our history, Oswald dear, and have always been the scene of frantic betting. Modern horse racing originated in 17th century England and became popular in 19th century America. It isn't included in the Olympics because the real athletes are the horses. Equestrian sports, on the other hand, demonstrate the true art of riding and have been part of the Olympics since 1912. In fact, my dear Oswald, in equestrian events there are two protagonists, the man and his horse. But now it's time to talk about ball games. Yes, you're right, Oswald. There are so many that we're only going to cover the most popular ones. Let's start with the two sports that require the use of small balls and equipment with which to hit them. First of all, tennis. Just imagine, Oswald, in the Middle Ages a kind of tennis was played in France, in which the players hit the ball with their hands, and it really hurt. The first rackets were a kind of carpet beater covered with expensive parchment. This is how the youngsters of the Renaissance made their rackets. Fortunately, Oswald dear, a cross-stringed racket similar to the modern model was soon invented. In the beginning, the court was divided by a simple rope, but the players always argued about whether the ball had passed over or under the rope, and so the net was adopted. Modern tennis comes once again from England. Originating in the 19th century, it soon became popular all over the world. The World Tennis Championship is called the Davis Cup and has been held since 1900. The prize is a huge silver cup which the winning team keeps for a year. What did you say, Oswald? Yes, baseball was invented by the Americans. But you should know that 5,000 years ago, the ancient Egyptians played a very similar game. During certain religious ceremonies, the priest threw a leather ball amongst the faithful, which they hit back using a sturdy stick. The game of hit the ball and run has been known all over Europe since the Middle Ages. But you're right, Oswald. Baseball, with all of its rules and the placing of the players on the fields, originated in the United States in 1839 and soon became one of the national sports. What are you doing, Oswald? No, the ball isn't the wrong shape. In American football, like rugby, you use an oval ball. Rugby is the ancestor of American football, and since the 17th century, the game of passing an oval ball to each other, using both hands and feet, has been played in the English city of Rugby. The game spread rapidly throughout English colleges, and its official regulations were drawn up in 1846. No, Oswald. I really don't think you're built the right way for it. To play rugby, you have to be very sturdy. But rugby doesn't just call for muscular strength. You also have to be able to use your brain. The game plans for reaching the goal area are very complex. The game plans for American football, the sport which started in the USA with the spread of rugby and soccer, are also very complex. The matches in American football are very violent. Thank goodness the players wear a lot of protective padding. Here is a typical phase of the game. The 22 players are ready to spring into action and fight for possession of the ball. Basketball, on the other hand, originated in 1891 at Springfield in the United States as a non-violent indoor sport. It was invented by a gym teacher and was an instant success with the students. Do you know why it's called basketball, Oswald? Because in the beginning, genuine baskets for peach harvesting were used. The bottom of the basket was closed, so every time a team scored, the game had to be stopped whilst the ball was retrieved. A good basketball player certainly has to be tall. The baskets are set at a height of 3 meters. Yes, Oswald, you're right. Basketball is a very pleasant sport in any case, and you don't have to be 2 meters tall to enjoy it. But get ready, Oswald. We're about to talk about the world's best-loved ball game, soccer, its history and its rules. Soccer is played on a grassy field, about 120 meters long and 90 meters wide. 2 goals, 7 meters long and about 2.5 meters high, are the objectives of the opposing teams, each made up of 11 players. The players score a goal when they succeed in kicking the ball into their adversary's goal without touching it either with their hands or arms. The goal is protected by a goalkeeper, the only player who within his area can touch the ball with his hands. On the soccer pitch, the referee, aided by 2 linesmen, relentlessly makes sure that the rules of the game are respected. What did you say, Oswald? Everybody knows that. You're right. But perhaps not everyone knows that the first match of a game very similar to soccer was played in 50 BC. It was in China, my dear Oswald, and people played Tsu Chu, literally hit the ball with the foot. Even the Japanese played a similar game, called Kamari, in which 8 men kicked the ball around. Just imagine the confusion that reigned at the first international match, with everyone playing according to their own rules. Modern soccer, or football, on the contrary, has a very precise set of rules, established in England in 1863. The first soccer players were really odd-looking. They wore a beret in their team's colours, knee-length trousers, and on their feet, little boots. Today, more than a century later, soccer manages to unite millions of fans in the football grounds or at home in front of the television. Let's take a look at the rules of the game now. Wait a moment, Oswald. In order to decide who is going to kick off, the referee tosses a coin. Whoever wins the toss may choose either the end of the field which they prefer or possession of the ball. From the moment in which the ball is in play, all of the players' movements must take place within the white lines which mark the limits of the pitch. If the ball crosses the sidelines, the linesman has to decide which team should recommence play. No, Oswald, a throw-in from the sidelines is done with the hands, by raising the ball above your head. When the ball crosses the goal lines, having been deflected by a defence player, the attacking team is entitled to a corner. Soccer isn't a very violent sport, but sometimes when tackling, players strike their adversary's legs instead of hitting the ball. When the referee notices this, he blows his whistle to stop the game in order to punish the offenders. If the foul is very bad, the referee may send off the guilty player. The punishments awarded near the penalty area are the most feared. If an attacker is brought down within the opposing team's goal area, the referee awards a penalty kick, which is the maximum forfeit. 1-to-1, player against goalkeeper. It's almost inevitably a goal. Goal! This is the moment that every fan waits for in the football ground or at home in front of the television. Unfortunately, though, certain groups of fans aren't very sporting. Thus, the police are obliged to patrol the grounds in order to avoid incidents. Violence is so stupid, isn't it, Oswald? Well, Oswald, the game's over. Have a quick shower, then we'll talk about the World Championship and the Rimmet Cup. So, Oswald, here we are, ready to talk about the Soccer World Cup. But tell me, aren't you curious about its history? The first World Cup took its name from its inventor, Mr. Rimmet, who in 1928 obtained the International Federation's permission to organise a worldwide competition between national soccer teams. The trophy, designed and crafted by Paris's most famous goldsmith, was an 80-centimetre tall cup, which weighed 4 kilos and was 50% gold. It was decided that the trophy would be awarded to the team which won the World Championship 3 times. It was also decided that the World Championship, like the Olympics, would take place every 4 years, but care was taken to ensure that the 2 events would never occur in the same year. And so, after the 1928 Amsterdam Olympics, the first World Cup was contended in 1930. The first World Championship was held in Uruguay, and only 13 nations took part, 4 European and 9 American. The final was all South American. Argentina was beaten by the home team, Uruguay, which won 4-2. In 1934, the World Cup came to Italy. Our national team consisted mostly of Juventus players and won the final against Czechoslovakia in extra time. In the meantime, the World Cup became increasingly famous. Many nations entered the championship, with the exception of England, the homeland of modern soccer. The 1938 championship was held in France. Italy started out as the favourite and won for the second time by eliminating France and beating a very strong Hungary 4-2 in the final. But the Second World War was fast approaching, and there was not much time to think about sport. 12 years passed before the fans were once more able to cheer at the World Cup. Oswald, don't let it go to your head. At the 1950 World Championship in Brazil, Italy didn't cut such a fine figure. In 1949, the entire Turin team died in an air disaster. This accident shook the national team to such a degree that they decided to travel to Brazil by ship, which was another disaster. The players were seasick, and the only area available for training was the ship's deck. After just a few days, all of the footballs ended up in the water, and so the Italian team was eliminated straight away. The Brazilians were certain that they would win, but in the final, Uruguay beat the home team 2-1. Just think, Oswald, because the Brazilian band was so upset, during the prize-giving ceremony, the Uruguay national anthem wasn't even played. In Switzerland in 1954, the title of world champions went to the German team, but Brazil's time was to come. In fact, in Sweden in 1958 and Chile in 1962, the World Cup was won by the Brazilian team, which took the leading position thanks to the imaginative play of a true soccer genius, Edson Arantes do Nascimento, better known as Pelé. 4 years later, the World Championship took place in England, the homeland of football, and at last even the English team was awarded the world title. The matches in Mexico City in 1970 were played at a height of more than 2,000 meters above sea level. Breathing was such hard work, Oswald. The final was between Italy and Brazil. Brazil won 4-1, at last becoming holders of the coveted Rimmit Cup. The 1974 World Championship in Germany and that of 1978 in Argentina were won by the respective home teams. In Spain in 1982, Italy rewarded its fans with some remarkable matches and won its third World Cup by beating Germany 3-1 in the final. Germany was runner-up again in Mexico in 1986, losing 2-3 to Argentina in the final. And now we've got to the 1990 World Championship. The final in Rome is once more between Argentina and Germany. This time Germany wins. Well, here we are, Oswald, at the end of our short journey in the world of sport. See you again for your next adventure. Bye-bye.